Hello, friends, and let's get started.
Brandon Carter turned down his street, looking forward to a relaxing evening that would turn into a long-awaited romantic weekend. He'd left work early on purpose so that he could prepare a surprise for Lauren. He'd made a reservation at their favorite Italian restaurant, bought her favorite white wine, and even stopped by a jewelry boutique to pick out a gift, a small but elegant pendant. This weekend wasn't just a chance for him to be alone with his wife, but an attempt to regain the closeness that seemed to have begun to fade after their oldest daughter left for college. He pulled up in front of the house and saw that Lauren's car was already in the garage. That pleased him. It meant she was home earlier than usual, too. Maybe she wanted to spend some time together, and she'd cook something, too. With that thought, Brandon entered the house, tossed his keys on the console at the entrance, and headed for the bedroom, where the muffled sounds of music were coming from. Stopping in the doorway, he froze, watching his wife. Lauren was sitting in front of the mirror, carefully applying mascara to her eyelashes, and her face had that look of concentration that he always found fascinating. She was wearing the very black dress he adored on her, tight-fitting, emphasizing her figure, with an open back. The pearls around her neck were shimmering, a gift he had given her last Christmas. Her favorite stiletto-heeled shoes stood on the bench beside the dresser, and a small leather briefcase next to them. Brandon grinned and leaned against the door jamb, crossing his arms over his chest. Wow, I think I forgot something. Remind me again where we're going? Lauren froze for a second, but then continued to color her eyelashes as if nothing had happened. She repeated without turning around. Yeah, he nodded toward the suitcase. I take it you've already packed everything. What hotel are we staying at? She made a final brush stroke, put her mascara back in her makeup bag, and then looked at him through the mirror. Brandon. Her voice was steady, almost detached, but there was something elusive in her eyes. I have something important to tell you. Even before she spoke the next sentence, his heart sped up involuntarily. I have a date this weekend. The words sounded so casual, as if she'd just told him she'd stopped at the supermarket for milk. There was complete silence in the room for a few seconds. Brandon stared at his wife, trying to comprehend what he had heard. His brain refused to take the words seriously, as if they were a stupid joke, but the look on Lauren's face left no doubt. Say it again, he said slowly, feeling something inside him clench. Lauren took a deep breath, put the blush brush aside, and finally turned to him. I know it's sudden, but I need this. I've been thinking about this for a long time. It's not she hesitated, as if she were searching for the right word. It's not cheating, Brandon. I just feel confused. I need some space. He blinked, feeling a wave of cold rising inside, running through his entire body. Space? His voice sounded unaccustomedly flat. You mean you need space to go on a date? Lauren shrugged her shoulders. I know it sounds awful, but try to understand me. After Ava left, I feel lost. Everything feels kind of empty. I love you, but I need to feel alive again. He took a step forward, but stopped when he saw her tense up. And you've decided that the best way to feel alive is to spend a weekend with another man? It's just a weekend, she said softly. Just one time? I needed to figure out what I really want. A swarm of thoughts, memories, emotions exploded in his head, but he didn't let himself show how much he was hurt by her words. Instead, he looked at her carefully, at her outfit, at the suitcase at her feet, at the pearls around her neck, his gift to her. You weren't even going to tell me, he finally said. Lauren looked away. I was going to tell you, but later. I thought it would be easier this way. Easier? He grinned softly, but there was no mirth in it. For who? For me? Or for you? She didn't answer. Who is he? Brandon asked, though he wasn't sure why he wanted to know. Lauren shook her head. It's not important. I don't want to get into details. He's married too. He has his own life. His fists clenched involuntarily. So you both just decided your marriages weren't that important? She sighed. Brandon, please. He looked at her intently. Have you made your decision yet? She nodded slowly. Something inside of him broke completely. It wasn't just a stab in the back, it was a betrayal, framed in impeccably calm words, spoken with the same confidence she'd once promised to be with him to the end. He swallowed, then forced out a strained smile. Then let's agree on one thing. Lauren looked at him warily. What's that? About you leaving your phone on. Just to be safe. She frowned but nodded. Okay. But you won't look for me. You won't interfere. He paused for a moment, then smiled a little wider. I promise. She nodded, turned back to the mirror, adjusted her earrings. Brandon, on the other hand, continued to stand at the door, watching her. A plan was already forming in his head. When the door closed behind Lauren, Brandon remained standing in silence. His gaze was fixed on the suitcase she'd so easily taken with her, as if she were leaving for another business trip, not a weekend with another man. There was still a heavy chill in his chest, but with it came the realization that he wasn't going to just sit around. He sat on the edge of the bed, interlocked his fingers, and looked out the window. Outside, the evening was beginning to thicken. The street lights were on outside. Someone was laughing on a neighbor's porch, and a bicyclist rode slowly down the road. Just an ordinary Friday night. Except for him, it was the starting point of something irreversible. Brandon reached for his phone, opened his contact list, and scrolled down. He didn't know why that particular thought crossed his mind, but as soon as his gaze locked onto the name, something inside him twitched. Vanessa Brooks. She'd once been a part of his life. For years they'd worked side by side in the same office. She'd been his assistant, but their interactions had long ago gone beyond dry work communication. They understood each other half a word, could talk for hours without noticing the time. Her easy laugh, her ability to pick up on details, her subtle sarcasm, all of it stuck in his mind. But most importantly, it was before Lauren. Before his and Vanessa's friendship had started to grow into something more. He made a choice then. He chose loyalty, refused temptation, saved his marriage, transferred Vanessa to another department, then cut off contact altogether. Anything to keep weakness from taking a chance. And now Lauren, his wife, the woman for whom he'd broken that very connection back then, was quietly going away for the weekend with her lover without a shred of doubt. Brandon took a deep breath, replayed the moment in his head when Lauren confidently said, "It's just something I need." His jaw clenched. His fingers pressed the screen on their own. A beep. 1, 2. Hello? He felt something distant, long forgotten, inside him shudder. Vanessa's voice was still the same, soft, slightly husky, as if she'd just laughed. "Vanessa, it's Brandon." There was silence on the other end of the line, but it was filled with meaning. He imagined how she must have frowned, how she raised an eyebrow, how her lips opened slightly in surprise. "Wow," she finally exhaled. "I didn't expect to hear your voice. 10 years later. How are you doing?" "SOSO." She caught something in his voice, because instead of asking the usual questions, she asked him directly, "What's wrong?" Brandon leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "Lauren just told me she's going away for the weekend with another man." There was silence again on the other end of the line. Only now she was different. "Shit. Yeah, she was. And you're calling me because?" He smiled a little. Her directness had always been her trademark. "Because you're the first person I thought of." That confession sounded a little too sincere, but he wasn't about to soften it. Vanessa was silent for a few more seconds, then grinned softly. "I always knew you'd come back." He heard her setting something aside on the table, maybe a cup or a glass. "Where are you now?" he asked. "In my new house. I moved a couple years ago, picked a neighborhood with a good school for Ethan." His name pierced Brandon like a sharp shard of the past. Ethan, her son. He remembered standing next to her at her husband Jason's funeral. He remembered holding her hand as she struggled with the weight of grief. Something had changed between them then. But he was married, and she respected his marriage. "Are you alone tonight?" "Yeah." "Ethan's at Jason's parents' for the weekend." Brandon looked at his keys lying on the nightstand. "Can I come over?" The pause was longer this time. "If you're not afraid it will change everything between us." He covered his eyes. "It's already changed. I'll be there in an hour." He heard her quiet chuckle in the receiver, but without a trace of irony. "Same address. I'll be waiting." She disconnected first. Brandon put the phone down, then stood up, walked over to the mirror, and looked at himself. Everything was crystal clear. He grabbed his keys and jacket and left the house. He had somewhere to go. Brandon parked in front of a low brick house on a quiet street in the suburbs. There was none of the hustle and bustle of the big city, no neon signs or party noise. Just flat lawns, neat houses, and a light breeze ruffling the branches of the trees. He turned off the engine, but didn't hurry to get out. The lights in the windows of Vanessa's house were on, dim, warm. He picked up his phone, looked at the screen. No messages from Lauren. Not even an attempt to see if he'd rebelled, if he'd asked questions, if he'd tried to stop her. Taking a deeper breath, he opened the door and stepped out. Walked up the steps at a leisurely pace, allowing himself one last moment before everything changed. Knocked on the door. She opened almost immediately, as if she were standing at the threshold, waiting. She was wearing simple dark jeans and a light black, long-sleeved sweatshirt. Her hair was tucked back, but a few strands were disheveled, giving her look relaxed. She looked different from how he remembered her, a little older, wiser, but there was still the same expression in her eyes. "You've really come," she said, scrutinizing him. "And you really waited," he replied. She smiled slightly and stepped aside, letting him inside. The house smelled of sandalwood and something sweet and light. He looked around, a cozy living room, soft lamp light, a stack of books on the coffee table. Nothing flashy, nothing ostentatious. Just calm. "Would you like a drink? Wine? Whiskey?" "Whiskey." She nodded and headed for the kitchen, leaving him alone. Brandon stepped closer to the window that overlooked the backyard. The dark sky, the faint shadows of the trees, the tranquility of the place reminded him of what had been missing for the past few years. He hadn't even realized how tired he was of the constant tension at home, of Lauren, who looked at him less and less often the way she once had. Vanessa returned with 2 glasses, handed him one, and their fingers touched for a second. The warmth of her skin ran an electric current through him, like a memory, like the return of something once forbidden. "Do you need to talk?" she asked quietly, taking a seat across from him. "I guess I just wanted to be here." She nodded, taking a sip. "I saw it in your eyes back then, when you chose her over me." He grinned. "It was the right decision then, and now it feels wrong?" Brandon hesitated, taking his time to answer. "Now it seems outdated." She didn't bother to answer, just looked at him over the glass. There was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding. A few more minutes of silence passed, but this silence wasn't awkward. It was filled with meaning. Then Vanessa stood up, took his glass, set it on the table next to hers. "We can keep talking, or we can not talk." He looked at her. In that moment, the past was no longer a memory. Everything became real again. She stepped closer, slowly, as if giving him a chance to stop her. But he didn't move. She reached up, touched the collar of his shirt with her fingers. "Tell me if you don't want to do this." Brandon reached for her in response, wrapping his palm around her neck, pulling her a little closer. "I've spent too long trying to do only what's right." Their lips met, slowly at first, as if studying each other anew, remembering how it should have been then. Then the kiss deepened. There was something hungry in it, unrestrained. Vanessa turned his back to the couch, pushed a little harder, forcing him down. His knees parted slightly, and she stepped between them, running her hands over his chest, then his shoulders. "It's strange," she whispered, sliding her lips along his jaw. "I've imagined so many times what this would be like, and it's still better than I could have imagined." Brandon closed his eyes, sinking into those sensations, feeling something inside him finally let go. It didn't matter what happened next. It didn't matter how it would change everything. Right now, there was only this moment. He didn't leave that night. Sunday near noon, Brandon sat in the living room, clutching a cup of cold coffee in his hands. He'd been waiting. Since Lauren had gotten into that Uber on Friday night, he hadn't tried to call her, hadn't texted her. He hadn't even checked to see where she was, though he could have. Her location was still available. He knew she'd come back when she saw fit, confident that things would stay the way they were. At exactly 2:23 p.m., a car pulled up in front of the house. Brandon looked up from his phone, watching as Lauren stepped out of the back door of the Uber, slung her bag over her shoulder, and swayed her hips slightly as she headed toward the house. She looked as if she'd just returned from a resort. Easy gait, a smile, her hair neatly tidied, a satisfied expression on her face. The door opened, and she stepped inside as if nothing had happened. "Hi, love," she stretched softly, setting her bag down by the stairs. She walked past, and the sweet, subtle scent of her perfume wafted through the air. It was different, not the one she usually wore. Not hers. Hi, Brandon replied quietly, not rising from the couch. She paused, looking at him with slight surprise, as if she expected a different reception. Maybe she'd expected silent displeasure, tense silence, but not this. You look like you haven't missed me, Lauren said with a slight smile as she slowly made her way toward him. Brandon watched her, the way she lowered herself onto the couch next to him, her hands sliding over his shoulder. Somehow I was sure you'd be back by now, he said quietly, setting the cup down on the table. She smiled even wider, as if glad to hear him say it. You know I couldn't miss an evening with you. You and I are more than just 2 days apart. Her fingers traveled down his arm, then up, to his neck. Brandon didn't move, letting her play her part to the end. You're not mad? She whispered, moving closer as if she were going to kiss him. He tilted his head slightly, avoiding her lips, and looked straight into her eyes. Was I supposed to be angry? Lauren bit her lower lip, as if mulling over his reaction. I know it was a bit sudden, but you realize it was just one time. It doesn't mean anything. Brandon stared at her, still unmoving. Just the one time? Yes, she nodded. I just wanted to feel different. Refresh myself. I feel better now. Our relationship will only benefit from this. She ran her fingers over his chest, trying to get him to react. Brandon, let's forget it. This weekend gave me what I was missing, and now I'm all yours. He tilted his head slightly, watching her. Really? Of course, she smiled, but a slight worry flashed in her eyes. Brandon slowly pulled his phone out of his pocket, opened the gallery, and turned the screen to her. There was a picture on it, her sitting at a bar with a man whose hand rested on her knee. The next frame was of the same man kissing her in a hotel elevator. Then a picture of herself entering the room, and then their entertainment in the room. Her body tensed. What is this? This is your one time, he said calmly. To be precise, it's Friday night. Do you want to see Saturday? There's a one time too. Lauren was silent. Her eyes darted across the screen, then met his. Did you hire someone to watch me? Of course I did. You didn't want to tell me who he was. I was curious. She stood up abruptly, her hands clenched into fists. Are you out of your mind? That's not fair. Brandon leaned back on the back of the couch and crossed his arms over his chest. Lauren, these are facts. Your facts. She swallowed. Brandon, you don't understand. What exactly don't I understand? His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. Lauren bit her lip, her shoulders shaking slightly. It's not what you think it is. So you weren't with him, and you weren't cheating on me? She didn't say anything. Or were you? But now you want to convince me it didn't matter? Lauren exhaled, sinking back down onto the couch. I didn't mean for it to come out this way. Her voice grew quieter. You thought I'd just accept it? She looked at him with despair. I thought I could control it, that I could go back and it would be the same. He looked at her for a long moment. Nothing would ever be the same again. Lauren covered her face with her hands. She wasn't crying, but her shoulders were shaking. Brandon, you know I love you, just like I love him. She lifted her head, but couldn't answer. Brandon stood up from the couch, feeling the fatigue building in his chest. Not anger, not rage, but fatigue, deep, pervasive fatigue from the fact that he no longer saw the point in fighting for this marriage. He looked at Lauren, who sat hunched over, her fingers nervously fumbling with the hem of her dress. She looked confused, but there was no real remorse in her gaze, just fear. Fear of losing not him, but her familiar, comfortable life. I'm filing for divorce, he said in a steady voice. She looked up sharply. What? A divorce? Yes. I'm seeing a lawyer tomorrow. Brandon she jerked toward him, but he pulled back. No. It's over. He didn't yell, didn't accuse, didn't try to expose her further. He just told the truth. Lauren shook her head, clutched her hands into her lap. It was just a mistake. Stupid. Don't you get it? No, Lauren, you don't understand. You left. You chose another man. You decided you had the right to cheat on me because you felt like it. I'm not making a scene. I'm not humiliating you. I'm just leaving. She swallowed convulsively, stepped closer. We can fix this. We can try. Yes, I was a fool. I thought I needed this, but I need you, Brandon, just you. He stared at her in silence, and in that silence she realized her words didn't change anything. You're not going to tell anyone, are you? She asked suddenly, fixing her gaze on him. Brandon grinned. Who are daughters? Do you think I should lie to them? She exhaled, and something akin to panic flashed in her eyes. No, Brandon. Don't do that. They won't understand. They will. And they need to know the truth. Lauren covered her face with her hands. Please, I'm going to Ava tomorrow. I want to tell her in person. Lauren sank down on the couch, closing her eyes. You'll turn them against me. Brandon shook his head. No, I'll just tell it like it is. That evening, Brandon stood in front of the door to Ave's dorm. The drive to the university had taken 2 hours, and the whole time he'd been mulling over how to tell her. How to explain that her mother had chosen her whim over their family. Ava opened the door a few seconds later. Dad? She looked at him in surprise. What are you doing here? Is everything okay? He nodded. They walked outside, finding a quiet spot in the park near campus. Brandon didn't know how to choose his words, but he couldn't lie. My mom and I are getting a divorce. Ava froze. What? Why? She wanted a weekend away with another man because she thought it would make her feel alive. Her daughter opened her mouth but said nothing. She cheated on me, he said bluntly. Ava turned away abruptly, gritted her teeth. Are you kidding? I wish I was. She clenched her fists. Brandon gave her a moment. She inhaled deeply, then exhaled. Is she the one who wants a divorce? No. She wants me to pretend it never happened. Ava turned toward him, her eyes burning. You wouldn't do that, would you? Of course I won't. She shook her head, crossed her arms over her chest. I can't believe it. I thought she was... No, I didn't think she was capable of this. Brandon squeezed her shoulder. You don't have to jump to any conclusions right now. Just know that I'll always be there for you. Ava nodded, but there was something new in her eyes. Disappointment. Are you going to tell Maddie? Yeah. Do you want me to come with you? I think it's better if I talk to her alone. Ava nodded slowly. Okay. But if she says anything against you, I won't keep quiet. Maddie was waiting for him on the front porch. Ava texted me, she said when he got out of the car. He sighed, sitting down next to her. I didn't want you to find out this way. Maddie stared off into the distance, her gaze cold. Had she really cheated? Yes. Her daughter gritted her teeth. I hate her. Don't say that about your mother. Why not? She ruined our family. He put his hand on her shoulder. I don't want you to carry hate inside you. She brushed away a tear. I don't care. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Daddy, are you with someone now? She suddenly asked. Brandon glanced at her, then looked away. Yes. She nodded. I'm happy for you. When he got home, Lauren was waiting for him at the door. Did you go to your daughters? What did they say? She asked. They know the truth. Her lips quivered. Do they hate me? Yes? No. They're very disappointed. Tears came to her eyes. I'll do anything you want. Please don't go. I'm already gone, Lauren. You just didn't notice. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm sorry, but he wasn't listening anymore. The divorce went faster than Brandon expected. Lauren tried to resist at first, to drag out the process, to make a scene, but she quickly realized she had no chance of reversing it. He was adamant. Her tears didn't move him. Her screams didn't make him angry, and her pleas for another chance were shattered by his icy silence. Everything he felt for her was in the past. The lawyers had agreed on terms. Lauren got a house, financial support, everything she needed to ensure her life was on the level she was accustomed to. Brandon didn't argue. He didn't care about the money. What mattered was that he was free. Vanessa didn't rush him. She didn't push, didn't try to get him right after breaking up with Lauren. She'd given him space, let him decide for himself when he was ready. But Brandon wasn't about to put life on hold. 6 months after the divorce, he moved in with Vanessa. It happened naturally, without any loud words. Just one day he stayed with her for a night, then a week, and then he realized he didn't want to leave anymore. They traveled, enjoyed each other, made new memories that had no room for old wounds. Eden quickly got used to Brandon, and Brandon got used to him. They spent evenings watching basketball games, playing video games, and discussing college plans. It all felt so natural, like they had always been a family. 2 years after their divorce, Brandon proposed to Vanessa. Without a lot of pathos or a crowd of witnesses. They were just walking along the beach at sunset, and he realized he didn't want to put it off any longer. Marry me, he said, squeezing her hand in his. She didn't ask if he was sure. She knew he wouldn't have said those words if there wasn't a firm conviction in them. Yes, Vanessa replied, smiling. The wedding was small, just the immediate family. Brandon's daughters, Eaton, a few friends. They didn't want to turn it into a big event because they knew what mattered wasn't the celebration, but what came next. The life they started together was filled with joy. A year later, they had a son and then a daughter. Brandon, who once thought his days of fatherhood were in the past, was surprised to find himself happy to hold an infant in his arms again, to wake up at night again, to teach someone to walk again. Years passed. Brandon's daughters grew up. Ava graduated and was preparing to marry her longtime boyfriend. Maddie had gone to medical school and was going to be a doctor. Ava's wedding was a big event, and Brandon and Vanessa were at the center of the day. He saw his daughter glowing with happiness. He saw Maddie helping her adjust her veil. He saw Ethan looking at his foster sister with a smile. And he saw Lauren. She had come with her husband, Michael Thompson, the man she'd met a few years after her divorce. She had remarried, built a new life. But as she looked at Brandon and Vanessa, at their children, at their happiness, something read in her eyes that she couldn't hide. Loss. She had lost him forever. And now she knew that nothing would ever change that. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.